Hello, everybody, and welcome to BLS026 Show and Tell with Devin Shoemaker. Devin, how are you doing?
I'm doing super well, super excited to be on here, and I'm just excited to actually talk to you in person for the first time.
Yep, awesome. Likewise, man. We've been following each other, I guess, for maybe over half a year on different social networks.
Yeah, definitely.
And looks like we got quite some few shared interests. So this is one of the reasons you were on my list to invite. Today we're going to talk about Nxtend.
Yes.
I'm not sure if for me your image is freezing. So let's see if we have any issues, any technical issues right now. No, it looks like it's well on mobile. So let's just keep going. I think that works. For those of you that don't know you, can you please introduce yourself a little bit? Like, what are you doing and where are you working, etc.?
Yeah, sure. So currently I'm working at Ionic, a company that invests a lot in tools for developers to build kind of hybrid cross-platform applications using web technology. I've been in software development for, I don't know, 13 years or so as a hobby. And professionally for, I think, 8 or 9 now. So I've been involved in a lot of different communities, whether it's, video game console modding or just web development and whatnot. But yeah, now I work at Ionic, and I think it's a really awesome company to be at. And it's kind of a space that I'm really interested in general. Awesome. And aside from that, I've been working on an open source project, a set of plugins for Nx for the better part of a year now. And so that's kind of bridging my love for monorepos and Nx with Ionic together. So I think that's going to be what we're talking a bit about today. So I'll hold off for now.
Definitely. Awesome. Yeah, that's a great intro. I think Ionic, at least in my book, is one of the pioneering companies in building something open source and trying to make a business out of that. I mean, pioneering, maybe if you go all the way back to Red Hat, maybe that's really one of the pioneers, but at least in the open source web development ecosystem, I don't think I know a lot of companies that do something very similar. It always had my interest. And for you, what Nxtend started out with is the capacitor part. Is that correct?
Actually, no. The very first thing was the Ionic React plugin, and it didn't have any capacitor support. So I kind of started from the front because I had a need I wanted to build an Ionic React app in Nx. And so I started with that, and getting the components to work was the easiest part. And I worked my way back to capacitor from there.
Okay, interesting. I thought the first was capacitor. So, and then I have a question for you. The project that you initially wanted to build with this React, did you already manage to work on that? Or
classic story of open source. No. And I've actually restarted it several times as I've iterated on my own plugin. Yeah. You know what I mean? But yeah, I've got the authentication working, so we've made progress.
Yeah, it's getting there.
Yes.
Yeah. I think, as you said, this is classic OSS developer, maybe any developer attitude, right? So you have a need, you start building a library that fills this need, and then you're stuck on doing this library.
Right. I actually just saw a tweet about this the other day, I think, and yeah, it definitely hit home hard.
Yeah, I've had several occasions as well. I'm still going to write the book, but I already have like the framework and the example apps. Everything's ready. I just need to write the book. So,
well, props to you. That's something that I would love to do at some point, but it's pretty intimidating.
It is, and I did one for Angular Universal. I actually did it twice, and it's an interesting journey, but I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. I mean, for me, it's real torture, and video content is easier. Let's put it that way. So,
yeah.
So one of the interesting things, I think, and we briefly mentioned this when we were off screen before, is open source changing your lives. So for those of you checking out, we normally hop into code like in the first 5 minutes. We will get to code today. Big part will be code, but I'd love to touch on this subject. As Devin works for Ionic right now, and this is also the related technology you were building the Nx plugin for, and I don't think this is accidentally. Maybe you can share a little bit how that went, how they found out about you, or did you classically apply?
Yeah, so I did apply myself, right? But I had been working on these plugins for a while, and I know that there was at least a couple of the people on the team that I ended up joining who had seen my work, just from me reposting stuff. They probably keep an eye on a lot of the Ionic related things that are posted out there. So I think I definitely got some assistance, but I had to go through the ringer like everyone else. I had a take-home project. I had several interviews, so it definitely wasn't like a walk in the park in terms of like, oh, hey, you've got this open source thing, you like us, come on in. But
how much do you want to earn? It wasn't that way.
Yeah, right. But I mean, all things considered, I wouldn't have expected it any other way, right?
Yeah, sure.
For me, I was just honored to be considered, and I think it did help. But I feel good about how the whole process went and where I'm at now.
Yeah, it wasn't a free lunch, to put it in that way. It was just I can totally imagine that really helps. So awesome. So Nxtend today, let's get the site here in view and put ourselves on the row down below here. So Nxtend of today, I think, consists of three plugins, and I'll bump this up a little bit.
Yeah, technically we have 4. The last one was a very small one that I figured I could whip up over a weekend, which kind of enables Firebase, easier interfacing with the Firebase CLI from an Nx Workspace without having to CD down into directories. But that's kind of a little bit separate from what I think we're going to be talking about today.
Right, but it's interesting. So under the Nxtend scope, you also have a Firebase plugin, and that's for doing like Firebase functions-based development?
So I need to go. I haven't really ever developed Firebase functions, so that's something that I could probably go down. But essentially, it's a bridge between the root of your Nx Workspace, your project directory, and the Firebase tools CLI. So you can execute any Firebase tools command through this plugin at the root of your workspace. So if you wanted to do a deployment or something like that, or even a Firebase init, to set up a new project, without this, you either have to configure some stuff yourself to make it easy, or you're going to be going into those directories each time you want to interface with that CLI.
Interesting. So I can imagine that Firebase Builder is mostly a builder or executor in the modern terms.
Yep.
Interesting.
So I try to make it as lean as possible so that there wasn't going to be as much maintenance, or I didn't have to support every Firebase command. So it's kind of just like it leaves the user up to just passing in the command they want, and they can do whatever they want with it.
Interesting. I'm about to wrap around a third-party tool called Prisma that I use for a lot of database. I'm definitely going to check out what you did there, because I think it's a similar issue.
Yeah.
So then the three, let's say the three regular plugins I see here is Nxtend Ionic Angular, Nxtend Ionic React, and Nxtend Capacitor. And then the OG of these three was Ionic React. If I recall.
Correct.
Okay, perfect. So I think most people know Ionic, probably most people watching my stream in any case, but maybe you can briefly touch on Ionic and why you needed this plugin. Sure.
So there's a few different components to the Ionic umbrella. So I will start with what we call the Ionic Framework. It's kind of the oldest piece of Ionic, but still one of the most relevant. So they actually use web components, pure web components, and have developed a library of UI components and a couple layers on top of that to provide a really native feeling experience to web developers. Right. So even if you're just developing a pure web app, you can have a library of components that will make it look like an iOS or Android app right out of the gate. They have modifications to the Angular and React router that basically provides page transitions and things that you would expect on mobile. So really trying to bring a native feeling experience to web developers. And those web components have wrappers for Ionic, Angular, and Vue. So you don't have to care about the implementation layer underneath. You don't even have to care that they're web components in almost every situation. You can just start using these everywhere. And I really like that too, because as a developer, I have transitioned from learning Angular, React, and a little bit of Vue, and had a very similar API to work with, and being able to make really good looking websites without having to relearn everything.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of the component layer, if you will.
Right.
And then we can move on to Capacitor, which is a set of tools that will, for lack of a more in-depth explanation, it will compile your application to either iOS or Android. And so it essentially will create an Android iOS app that will start up a native app with a web view, and that loads your application. And then on top of that, they have a plugin system that allows for web developers to essentially gain access to native functionality. So you're not just limited by a web view. You do have access to pretty much any native functionality that you can think of, as long as you or someone is willing to put in the work to create a plugin for it.
Awesome. So to sum it up, Ionic, whether Angular, React, or Vue, takes care of rendering out a bunch of web components and unifies the API, so somebody can leverage their current HTML, CSS, and JavaScript skills to build native-feeling mobile apps, but they actually run in a web view. Yeah,
that is correct. So unlike, let's take like React Native or something like that, they kind of go more of an approach where you have to, or where it will render out like real native components. It's hard to say whether one is better or worse, but in this case, developers can take all of their web development, skills and be able to do all this. So you don't have to learn about, I think with React Native, you don't really get access to DOM elements, things that you're used to in that manner. So, so it is rendering in a web view, but the performance is exceptional for what it is. I've always been impressed with the Ionic team and what they've been able to do with web technology, and even being able to fool people who are traditionally kind of anti-hybrid apps.
Yeah, no, I totally feel that sentiment, and I've been blown away. I've known Ionic for years. Actually, I think 2014 must have been like before I started traveling and before open source changed my life. I actually founded the Ionic Netherlands user group, and I was always blown away by the premise they had. Like, you can use the same stuff, and for me, it was also one of the reasons to dive into Angular JS, because the original V1 of Ionic was based on Angular JS. And I think that's a very, very valid point, like reusing it. And I think they saw the potential of web components also very early on. I know Max is a big proponent of web technologies, and it's something he definitely likes to get out there. I think it's definitely a valid choice, and specifically if you want to leverage stuff. So if you're not building Facebook, which is probably the common thing, you might not need a real native app built in either Swift or Objective-C or Kotlin or Java. You might very well be working with this. And React Native, I've done a few projects in React Native as well, and it's nice in terms of similarity, but there's also caveats that you need to take care of, and then mostly rendering stuff, because then this React is super flexible by itself, and you can do quite a lot of things in your JSX, and it'll still compile as long as it's syntactically correct. And then React Native gives you quite a bunch, but there's a few limitations, things you cannot do. You need to take care of, I cannot render text if it's not inside the text element. So there's quite a bit of limitations, but you're not really writing web components, so you cannot just pop in a style. It needs to be a style that's accepted by React Native. So I've always kind of, for me, it's definitely not the same. Whereas with Ionic web components, you definitely have that feeling. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I won't keep people from the code for too long, but when I was getting into Ionic, because the first leg of my career, I was actually pretty much primarily a back-end developer. I might go into the front end to clean up something or add a very small feature. But Ionic was a really fun experience for me to actually help grow my front end skill set to
Right.
like where it is today. And so I was able to, produce really good UI, and also be able to play around with like native technology while still learning HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and enhancing my abilities there. So for me, it was like a win-win all across the board. And I haven't hit any bottlenecks that made me want to leave. So
awesome. Yeah, cool. And just for info, and what was your backend language of choice when you were working with this?
Oh, of choice. I guess of choice was at the time, but the most experience I had was Java. So it's kind of grown long in the tooth for me at this point. Right now at my new gig, we're doing a lot of Python, and I've had some Python experience, but I'm kind of growing in that, and I'm having a good time with a lot of the changes compared to the old Java world.
Can imagine must be quite a different experience from super strict to more lenient.
Right.
Yeah, need to get your tabs right though, but like once that is out of the way, Python should be definitely accessible.
Yeah, it's far worth the trade-off at the moment.
Very cool. Yeah. So then that's the Ionic part of this. I've also heard, I don't know if Ionic people like this comparison, but I often hear people say it's kind of like the Bootstrap for mobile apps, where you get a lot of reusable components that you can just use. I think they up it quite a bit because they have actually components. They have an API of these components. It's predictable. As you said, they wrap around the router. So they give you quite a bunch more. But if you want to have a mobile app that looks good and works with your technologies that you already know, Ionic's probably the way to go. And then briefly on Capacitor, I think this is I know this is a project coming from the Ionic team. Is it correct if I say it was there to replace PhoneGap?
Yes, I believe that's like kind of an official sentiment, but yeah, I mean, in practice, it will replace PhoneGap and Cordova, and we have seen, even before I got to Ionic, this is not just speaking for the company, but I've seen so many people be so happy with the developer experience of Capacitor over Cordova or PhoneGap, and I definitely know I felt that as well. I was never a very good PhoneGap developer. I was, treading water at best. So I've really enjoyed the experience.
Very cool. Yeah, I've not worked with Capacitor yet. I have not done a whole lot of mobile development, hybrid mobile development. But if so, as you explained earlier, you can point Capacitor basically at an index HTML, and it will wrap it around in a mobile app and give you basically publishable stuff that you can send up to the various markets.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Awesome.
And I was just going to say, like, you as a developer, just to give a little clarity on like the mental model on that, the Capacitor CLI does all the legwork for that. So, they will set up a couple of folders for your iOS and Android app. They will be responsible for like copying the build output over for you. And so you as a developer don't have to do any of the wrapping yourself. It's all completely automated.
And I think this is kind of an interesting side point related to this. One of the big advantages I think about Ionic is that you can actually develop the big part of your app in the browser. Whereas something with React Native, you're developing in your iOS simulator, or God forbid, Android simulator, which is like, definitely has a different experience. And in order to set it up, you might lose a few hours of your life. Whereas with Ionic and Capacitor, you can just pop it open in your browser, put it into a responsive view in a mobile simulator view in your browser, and you'll most likely have a super similar experience as long as you don't touch any device APIs.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And even in the situation of device APIs, I mean, you probably wouldn't still test on mobile, but the Capacitor camera plugin, for instance, it will automatically use a webcam if it's available.
Awesome.
So that's kind of the beauty of Capacitor. You don't have to code if else a couple times. It does all the legwork for you for splitting it up between the platforms if it can.
Yeah, awesome. So great work on that. So for everybody, nxtend.dev, nxtend.dev is the website. And now, without further ado, let's then move into the black screen. So what I have here is a basic Nx Workspace created with yarn create Nx Workspace. I'll get the comment in here for reference. For those of you that don't know, it's up there. And then let's get started. So show and tell today, Devin will navigate and I will drive. So I would say knock yourselves out. What do you do if somebody wants to do like anything with this
so I guess the question I'll ask you, and I think I probably know the answer to this, do you want to work with Angular or React?
So you probably think I'd say Angular, but I'm doing a lot of Angular. Let's go with React. I never touched Ionic React yet, and Ionic Angular. So let's go. And I think from your plugins, that's also the OG. So let's start with the OG.
Yes, it's definitely had the most battle scars.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and start with that one.
All right. So here in the terminal, since you're using yarn, you'll want to do yarn add. We can throw a -d in there. Yep. So we're going to install this as a dev dependency, and we'll do @nxtend, Nxtend for those listening, /Ionic-React.
Perfect. This will go ahead and install the plugin for us.
So, yeah, we just we're installing a single plugin now, and then here in a moment we can install all our peer dependencies with a schematic or a generator that I have installed in here. So we need a few other things, and we can do that. If you have the Nx CLI installed globally, you can do Nx.
Yep.
Looks like we do. And if you don't, you should just be able to do yarn Nx, so either works. But Nx, G for generate.
Let me put ourselves underneath the command so I don't have to worry about these, and actually going to put it on the side so we have best of both worlds. So this should be better. NXG.
Yep. @nxtend.
Nxtend.
/Ionic React. And we're going to do :init.
Init. Initialize a new project.
So yeah, this is just an easy step that I added in that is kind of a common paradigm across the Nx standard plugins as well. So your Narwhal React, Narwhal Angular, they all have an init schematic. So this basically prevents or makes it so users don't have to like manually install all the peer dependencies.
Right.
Which
I imagine that would be React DOM.
Not exactly. So I am actually, so part of what I've tried to do to simplify this plugin, I am actually piggybacking off of the standard Narwhal React plugin.
Right.
So in this, we're actually installing all the dependencies that it needs for that. And I believe actually we might be installing React and React DOM too. You might be right, just to get that out of the way.
But then, so you're piggybacking off of this. This is something I do with NXPM as well, my full stack generator. I just do whatever Angular app does and Nest app. It only supports these two at this moment. There will be more. So you're installing @Narwhal React then, and going to use that to do the legwork, the groundwork. I think. Yeah, I think yesterday I was talking with somebody about the extensibility of Nx, and I really like big props to the Nx team for how they set it all up and allowing these kind of things, because I think like it's unrealistic thinking about that the Nx team will develop all these kind of things and maintain all these kind of things, and it's very nice to leave room for people like yourself and myself to build plugins for stuff they see missing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, especially on the extensibility and how much they encourage it in the community too, because they've done an immense amount of effort to make the like React stuff work so well in Nx, you know, from setting up Jest and ESLint and everything. So for me, it's just good to be able to leverage that and make the modifications where I need to. Yeah,
totally. While this is installing, I'm not sure why it takes a bit. We should have quite a decent connection, but we can take a quick peek at the plugins that are there. Okay, installation finished, so we can continue right here. But for those of you unaware, Nx list will give you a list of all the plugins, and this is an ever-growing list. It's getting quite big. So we see Nxtend right here. Deploy solutions. There's a Docker solution that I've been working with as well. There's Nuxt and Vue for those of you who like to work with Vue. From yours truly, there's the Go plugin, which I'm going to pick up, Spring Boot. So basically Flutter even. So anything you can think of can work in React and eventually will work in React and in Nx and eventually will work in Nx, I think. So That's a quick aside while we were working on the waiting for the package installation, which is now done. And I see it made changes to the workspace JSON and the package JSON. So what happened here?
Yeah, we can pull up a diff if we really need to. But yeah, I think the workspace.json just set a couple defaults. Dependencies here, we've got the Ionic React dependencies as well as the Narwhal React library. We've also installed the Nxtend Capacitor plugin as well, since we'll be leveraging that. So those two plugins kind of piggyback off each other, which is really interesting and just kind of shows how these plugins are kind of stackable as well, if you will. They're you can use them as building blocks to extend things. So yeah, and if we go down here, it just says, since you did not have a default collection, or which would basically be the default plugin you want to use set, it was defaulted to the workspace, as it is in the standard Narwhal plugins. I'm like, okay, this is the first one you're going to use. We can just assume that from now on you're running against this, which kind of saves you some time for executing commands.
Awesome, very cool. So okay, this seems straightforward enough. I really like again that you mentioned the pluggability and the extensibility. And I'm working on my full stack generator. I currently don't have any mobile support, so this might very well be a contestant for me to add to this stack, because I think it's it's a pretty nice addition. So okay, that's these changes. So we set up our project and prepared it for the Ionic React apps. So let's clean up the screen here and move on with the next step.
Sure. So now if we want to generate an app, I assume, we can go ahead and do nxg. And here's where the shorthand comes in. Since we do have a default collection of Nxtend Ionic React, we don't technically have to specify this, but it doesn't hurt to do that.
Yeah. Okay, but we could just go ahead and write whatever you have here as a schematic that prevents us from doing this thing. Okay, interesting. Yeah.
Right. So now we can say app or application, either works.
Yep.
And then from here, we can hit enter and start going through the steps.
Okay, cool. It will prompt what's the name. What do you generally use? Do you like, if we work on a product app, you do product, or you have more generic names?
Yeah, I mean, it just depends, I guess. If I'm working on sometimes I even use NX for single applications, and because the schematics and the tooling is so convenient, and I'll name it just the app itself, or, I've gone the org route. For this, why don't we just do, mobile? Yep,
I like that. Oh, not put a slash there, mobile. And this looks like very familiar to the default Ionic schematics.
Yes. So here, Ionic provides several different templates that you can use to start out with. There is a blank one that's just kind of a really basic shell, an example with a list view, one with the side menu that pulls out, and then some with the tabs at the bottom. I really like the side menu because I think that shows off kind of part of the impressive side of Ionic, especially with the really high performance animations and whatnot. So that's my preferred starter.
Let's go with that one. Awesome. I think this is also a very powerful thing, that Ionic comes with a few very nice defaults. And if you install the system and you create a new app, you're basically up and running directly. And you can easily tell your manager, like, I spent 5 hours building this thing, where you just generated it in 3 minutes. And
right. Yeah. Well, and to give the framework team credit, because I'm not the one. I work at Ionic now, but I do not work directly on the CLI and whatnot. I do for certain things, but that's not my, like, maintaining this stuff isn't my primary job right now.
Right.
So credit to the people that have worked on this for years. If you think about it, a side menu, tabs, a list view, I mean, most of your apps are going to start with one of these things, right?
Yeah.
So it's really nice to be able to just hit the ground running, like you said.
Yeah, definitely. What I often found myself doing was creating a combination. So I either start with side menu and add tabs to some view at some point. List is definitely something that I always rip out, but it's very nice to have some decent provided starting points there.
Yeah, it's impressive eye candy at the very least.
Definitely, yeah. Awesome. So this generated our app called mobile. And then if we go to our editor, it should refresh here. And let's give that a little nudge. So it will do that. There we go. And it comes with a nice E2E package as well. I assume this uses Cypress.
It does. So I was going to say, if we want to go back to your terminal real quick, if you go back to the last command and do a -- help, we can show off kind of all of the different options that are available right now.
Very cool. Yeah.
So you can specify the name if you want to directly, the directory if you want it to be under a subdirectory. Maybe you have, your tree inside Nx organized a little more heavily. You can easily do that. Unit test runner, we do have Jest available, or you can select none. And E2E test, Cypress, or none. And then there's a couple more small things there, that are pretty standard, like tags.
Yeah, tags, template, capacitor, dry run, Nx cache. Yeah, very cool. So this also, for when I look at integrating it into something like NXPM, this is definitely something I'll go heavy on. And then capacitor by default, and then the default blank template. So awesome. And then what I can see from here in the output, I guess we can also browse the tree, but having some pages, some components, but actually the app is pretty small. There's also a lib generator promoting to split these things out into apps and libs. Or have you been building your apps mainly inside this mobile in the apps folder?
So I thought about generating a library schematic before. It works just fine, but for now I haven't really priority-wise invested the time into that, because you can generate, since this is all based off of a Narwhal React application, a Narwhal React library will be just as sufficient, and you can just start writing your Ionic components in there. So I just haven't taken the time to, get something fleshed out.
Awesome.
But you absolutely can.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And then I think React Native, which does have an official supported plugin from the Narwhal team, they actually wrap the library generator and they just basically relay it to whatever React does. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You can just do React. And I think because React doesn't really need a separate build step on the package level, you can just basically use whatever you want. As long as it exports some TypeScript stuff, you should be golden there.
Yep.
Awesome. And then, okay, so this structure is very familiar for those of you working with Nx before or with an Angular CLI app, where you have like app assets and environments. This is our main.tsx file. This should be pretty uninteresting, where we just take the app from app and we render it out in our document root. So this is just like you would with any other app, maybe create React app. So then we probably want to take a look first at this app.tsx.
Yeah, so here's where some of the magic starts happening.
Right.
You'll see we have a bunch of imports for some CSS files. These are all standard Ionic CSS files. If you've used an Ionic app before, particularly like an Ionic React one, this is going to look very, very familiar. Right. So I try and stick as closely to the Ionic templates as possible. All their starter templates are open source and available. There's the open source nod again. So it was very easy for me to get up and running with that.
Yeah, awesome. And I think also for adaptability for other people, if they see this and they've worked with a non-NX Ionic React app, this probably will be very familiar, and they'll be happy to see this. Awesome. And then here the app itself.
Yep, so here's our root. If you've never used Ionic before, you'll probably see that some of these things are prefixed with Ion. So those are all Ionic components. We've got an outer Ion app layer that I believe kind of helps facilitate some of the transitions and some of the things that kind of take the web experience a little bit beyond. So all of your Ionic apps should start with an Ion app root. And then we have the Ionic React router that helps with those page transitions as well. And here we look at an Ionic split pane. And so once we get this app served up, you'll see, but this starter template comes with a side panel on the left for navigating throughout your app. And as it collapses, it turns into a hamburger menu that can slide out. So this is kind of just saying, okay, we've got two split panels. The menu is on the left, and our Ion router outlet is on the right. So that's where all of our routes should now be contained in, is that Ion router outlet. And then you can see we have a couple very standard routes, because the Ionic router is really a wrapper around the React router. So functionality from that should be very familiar to users.
Yeah, this looks definitely very similar to what I've been using in React as well. So the idea is that you basically add routes here, as long as you don't create a bespoke structure for this. This is generally how it works. So list your routes here, make sure they point to a component, and they will render out. And I think that's another plus for Ionic. Your URL bar keeps working, and you can use URL state, which is something I've always also been missing from other competing technologies, if you will.
Right. And again, that just comes back to, if you're a web developer, these are all things you're familiar with, and so you can expect same kind of behavior here.
Awesome. Very cool. So this looks very cool, and it's nice to see the Ion stuff coming from here. It's also really nice that they wrap around existing technologies. I think I know a few clients, if I show them this, they'll be happy, because this is exactly what they've been doing in all their other apps. And here it's even more similar to your web counterpart React apps than your React Native, because for React Native, often people use reactnavigation.org, which has another feel to it. So very cool. And yeah, maybe let's start up the app.
Yeah, sure. It should be all ready to go.
Cool.
So here I tried to, this is where maybe things, if you're familiar with Ionic, things are a little different. So, I guess no, the command is the same. So I'm thinking of typical like create React app. Seems like most of the people in the React world have not used the word serve very much.
Right.
So we're going to be doing Nx serve for this, because that's kind of more in line with what Nx uses for all their plugins. So throughout this, I have had to make a couple of interesting decisions where I try to bridge the gap between familiarity between what people of Ionic expect and what people of Nx expect, and make that as easy as possible. So since this is our only app in here, we can just hit Nx serve, or we can type Nx serve mobile for if we had multiple apps and we wanted to be specific on which one we're starting up.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely an interesting point. The serving, I've been building some CLIs with Nx based on Node, and others actually on Go as well. It's kind of weird to serve your CLI if you really just want to interact with it. So at times it can be a bit confusing, but for most of the web apps, totally makes sense, or APIs, if you will.
Right.
It totally makes sense. And then this hooks in, it looks like it hooks into the normal Nx Webpack stuff. Is this also something? Oh, there you go, bam. This let's quickly make this a bit wider so this is a bit more legible. But this definitely looks like any other Nx app. It also looks, there's a lot of chunks going on here, so I like to see that. It's looks like it's split up very well. It's a huge list, actually, 43. Can you explain a little bit where this comes from? Because it doesn't seem like these are user routes.
I believe that comes down to web component stuff, if I'm not mistaken. I definitely didn't have any hand at actually controlling this chunking, but I believe that's what it comes from at the end. So I think this is like a product of bringing in the Ionic components, which have web components under the hood. Right.
I also see this vendor tag. I never really paid a lot of attention to this, but it occurs to me that this is a particularly large list. So interesting. And then up here we have our URL. So this should open up, and of course it opens up in my different screen. So let's pull this one over back to where you all can see it. And where is this thing? This is it. This is it. I got it right here. Okay, this looks awesome. I didn't expect this nice dark layout, so that's first.
Yes, thanks the framework team. They do a really good job of bringing dark mode out as well, which is just kind of another one of those really nice things that you would expect on mobile these days, as well as the
Yeah.
web. But
Yeah.
you know, it's hard to go back once you're used to something like that.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm. Oh, this is not what I wanted to do. But this is. I didn't expect this, and actually, if I look at it this way, I would say, oh, this is awesome just to build your normal app. Doesn't even need to be a mobile app. You can just
Correct.
use this to build like an admin UI.
Yeah,
Very cool.
I absolutely love it. And if you want to, if you switch between your light and dark scheme, it should switch automatically as well. So this is all stuff that's just baked into Ionic. You don't have to do any configuration for that.
Very cool. I know on Chrome-based browsers you can switch the theme, but I can't find the shortcut here in Firefox. So, but yeah, this should automatically switch. And I think this is the hamburger menu you mentioned. Like this is there.
Yep. And so that automatically changes based on your screen size. So if you're even if you just drag your window smaller, it'll automatically change as well.
Very cool. Yeah. So
there you go.
Yeah, it's just really responsive here. And
right.
This like you definitely stuff you should check out. But this looks like it's tablet UI already. I think this looks like you get a tablet UI for free.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And one other thing I want to point out is that by default in the web, Ionic sets the whole app to a material design theme, so akin to something like Android. But if you go to your little responsive dropdown to change your device type, and you switch it to an iPhone,
let's get this one,
and then refresh.
Refresh the thing. Wow. Okay, that's
You'll
cool.
notice we have a much more iOS native feeling application here.
Yeah,
so this is something that is really nice with Ionic as well. It does a really good job of theming these components based on the device that it's running on. So like I said, on web, we just default to essentially Android. But this is something that, you're going to have to go out of your way to code in most other other solutions. So I think they've done a really, really good job at this as well.
Yeah, this looks pretty awesome. And if we put them side by side, you can definitely see that this has some different feel to it. I like the most common people note is the header. That's different. And then go ahead.
If we had more like elements on there, like buttons have slightly different radiuses on the corners. I mean, there's a lot of attention to detail.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think with that regards, also props to Ben Sperry, one of the co-founders of Ionic, who's also, I think, the chief designer. Ben does a great job designing. I've always loved the Ionic branding, even up to the color. I mean, yeah, it's kind of foolish maybe, but these kind of things really help polishing the project. And,
absolutely, he's done a really good job, and he's also the kind of head of the Ionicons project, which all these icons on the left-hand side here, they're all kind of part of this open source icon pack. So it's a really good separate project that's not like hooked into Ionic at all. You can even download all the SVGs themselves. So yeah, Ben does an awesome job.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, so you have easy switch. Do you still have the option to switch this using URL, or is this something that I made up? I thought you could like add on.
I haven't ever been familiar with that. It's possible that it was there, but I'm not sure. And to give you context, I got into Ionic right after Ionic 2 was released with Angular 2 support. So I missed a small time frame there.
Yeah. I think I already remind what it was. There was this, I think it's called Ionic Labs, or was called, not sure if it's still there. It gives you two browsers next to each other, one rendered iOS. And I think I'm mixing this one up. So
yeah, cool. And I think that actually exists. That's probably an important note on here. This actually does not currently use the Ionic CLI under the hood at all. And that is because those functionalities, Ionic CLI for React is very tied into React scripts, which does not play well with NX, because React scripts bundles in a lot of dependencies that are locked at certain versions, and NX has kind of their own priority with versions and whatnot. And so the Ionic CLI kind of brings in some version conflicts. So that is a really cool feature, and I wish we could show it off, but it's kind of further down the roadmap for now.
Yeah, totally. I totally hear that. So if I understand correctly, the Ionic React, the official Ionic React integration or plugin builds on Create React App then?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, awesome. So yeah, as said, very quickly, we were able to spin up a brand new app. It looks pretty cool, as my reaction, I guess, proven.
And you
so
might be able
awesome.
to tell us from your end, the stream doesn't have, I don't think it's streaming at 60 frames per second or anything, but I mean, I think you can attest that the animation is probably really fluid on your end.
Yeah, it's buttery smooth. It's really smooth. And yeah, big props to that. I've had a hard time distinguishing Ionic apps for a long time. And I think you really need to be an expert. Most likely the Ionic folks themselves can see it with maybe some pixel here or there that always glitches, but for your regular average Joe, he will never know. Well, they don't know what's native versus hybrid anyway, but yeah.
Right. I think the most important thing is it doesn't feel janky, it doesn't feel slow, it does what you expect, and that's the most important part.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, cool. So this is our React app, and then let me move this one next to side so we have easy access. So the app itself, we briefly went over this, and then I can imagine. So if we click one of the pages here, that this is a very standard issue React component.
And I can point out a couple things here.
Sure.
So to help with some of the navigation and transitions, like I've mentioned a couple times, we kind of wrap every literal page with an Ion page component. Yeah. And then we have a really nice Ion header component and a toolbar to make that toolbar that we've seen at the top, which you can populate with buttons and inputs and drop-down menus, all kinds of stuff. And then our Ion content kind of does a couple styling things to kind of add a little bit of padding, make things look good from there. So, and then you can populate these things with whatever you want, or you could use none of them, technically. It just kind of depends on how deep into the Ionic rabbit hole you want to go. Yeah.
I think one of the things that interesting to note here, they use a page. So first of all, naming in mobile apps makes total sense to call this a page. I also think this is quite a neat lesson in how you can split up your apps into things, because in most apps that I build with any component framework, I end up having my UI page or whatever I'm calling the thing for my company. So yeah, definitely an interesting layout here. Nothing very surprising, which is good in this case. Looks very nice. And one thing that does amaze me a little is the two headers.
Yeah. So if you noticed how the header on iOS was positioned quite a bit differently.
Yeah.
If you wanted to do a quick little experiment, you can go back to your code.
Yeah, let's put the Android one next to it maybe, so we can have a sit. Yeah, back to the code.
Sure. So just comment out that second header down below.
Yeah, comment this all out.
We refresh on iOS.
And then it will actually auto refresh for us. So that's nice. And then on Android, it's the same. And on iOS, we got, wow, it put it
the legacy.
There you go. Yeah. Okay.
So this is like the legacy approach that, like before, one of the more recent major versions of iOS. This was kind of how things were built. And so if you go back to the code, the second Ion header does have a slight different option there, the collapse equal condense. And so that essentially is like telling it to override the header up above. And this is a condensed, what they call it, header that, is that new, more modern looking style for iOS apps. So I don't know, I haven't ever talked to the team on the technical reason why you have to have the two headers like that, but that's what the starter templates ship with, and it works. So I've just included it in mine.
Let's and the Explore container, this is whatever sits inside here, I imagine.
Right. So there's no need for that to be in a separate component for any reason. If you just wanted to write all of your page logic right in there, it worked just fine.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so I think the this notable change here in the header, maybe I think iOS 12, I'm not sure, but they changed all their settings menu where you have now big bold text, and
Right. So Ionic does a really good job of keeping up with these trends as they release. They want to make sure that the applications stay, looking fresh and modern. So props to
Yeah.
them for giving them the option, but you also have the flexibility to change it however you like.
Yeah. Another thing that caught my eye here was the use of CSS vars, and I'm super happy to see this.
Yeah. So if you want to talk about that, we can go back to the code a little bit and we can kind of go take a look at where a lot of those are set.
Totally. Yep, totally.
So if you pull out your file explorer, I believe it should be near the top. Is it?
Team.
There we go.
Variables.
Yep. So here we can actually specify our global theme for our entire app right here, and all the Ionic components will honor these CSS variables.
Huh. This is very cool. So a thing I note here, so first of all, you have 3 colors of choice. Awesome. I think one of the most common of Angular material, one of the most common questions is like, hey, I only have 2 colors. I want to add third because we need third accent color. So Ionic either listened to that or they foresaw it. And another thing I think is interesting is that CSS vars is probably the easiest way to integrate with web components in general. I think first time when I used web components, I was using it with Bootstrap, and I thought I'll just whack my Bootstrap class on there, and then it doesn't render out your style because these things are living in the shadow DOM, so they don't have access to your global styles. This might very well be related to this, but I also I'm not sure if you have anything to fill in there.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know if that was a technical decision explicitly, but I do know the team has been like a big fan of CSS variables for a while, just in general. I know it's used internally at some other projects, and I think it is a good developer experience as well for something like this. You don't necessarily have to learn a new syntax for like the library for specifying a theme. I've seen other like component libraries that do that, where you maybe like have a theme provider or something like that.
Yeah.
This is very bare bones, straight web, and it works well.
Yeah, I think another time we can note that Ionic team paying a lot of attention about where the web moves, and how they can embrace this to not reinvent the wheel, but also make us developers happy. Because I was honestly happy to see this. This is these little things that are like, yeah, this is super nice. I prefer this, for example, over SCSS or less, which are great technologies, nothing bad about them. But if we have this option here in the browser, even better.
Right. It keeps things simpler for everyone.
Yeah, totally agree. And okay, cool. So, and this also, I think this is another thing with Ionic. It's nice. It comes out of the box with something that looks very pretty. And now your design team is like, this needs to be very different. And I found myself overriding CSS, doing like exclamation important all over the place to make sure that my style stuck. It seems like this is going the right direction and making that way easier. So
yeah, and I've also overridden styles on Ionic components before. I believe most of them take like class as a prop, so you can definitely still override them and manipulate them quite a bit. And if things don't fit your needs, there is no reason why you can't make a new component. You can even bring in Tailwind or something like that if you want. You do not have to use these components. You're not locked in any way.
Yeah. Very cool. Okay, and they even got this dark theme. So the dark is dark black 000. I really like that. It's the standard on iOS anyway. But this then should refresh, and there we go. If you want to have a little lighter tint, then that's available for you. One line out of the way. So yeah, awesome. This looks very, very good, and I like that you brought it inside the project as well. Even if you don't touch it, it's better to have it here, I think, than live in some node modules somewhere where you might be tempted to leave it alone.
Absolutely, yeah. I usually don't tweak with this very much at all. I really like their kind of default theme, so you can totally ignore it. I don't think there really is any need to update this. Usually, they've kept the API for these variables, I think, pretty standard. So you can totally just generate it and leave it.
Awesome. Yeah, this all looks super straightforward and super like logical. So yeah, awesome work here, Ionic team. So I really like it. It's really a praise Ionic session, and yeah,
I'm all
that's
for
good.
it.
Yep, me too. Same here. I actually sporting the Narwhal Pride today because
Oh, very nice.
Narwhal's awesome as well. I don't have an Ionic Pride shirt, so Mike, if you're listening, you can get my address.
Get one of these hoodies.
There you go. Yep. But yeah, that's for another day. So awesome. Looks super nice. I'm super interested here to do more with the React part. I think this, for somebody who's worked with React, this should be pretty straightforward. You can just start popping in your components here. Is there anything else you like to show off? You like us to know when looking at this, things to keep in mind, best practices, anything really?
I mean, this is a React app at the end of the day. There's no real opinionated structure to it. There's lots of Ionic content out there in the wild. So if you look up, some tutorials and whatnot, bearing in mind that there's going to be just some slight differences with NX in terms of the commands you're running and then the initial folder structure, but everything you learn about Ionic should apply here. So, I think that's really up to your judgment.
Yeah, I think personally one of the hardest parts working with React in large apps is the lack of opinionated structure. I kind of worked around it by applying my Angular structure to it, and clients seem to like it. They seem to really like to have some guidance where I split stuff into data access and features and UI things, so they have kind of a semantic meaning based on the library where they are. But this is definitely... Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say that's, if it were up to me, I mean, there's hard to prescribe one style for everyone, but I do prefer to break my kind of things up by domain and features, like you said.
Right.
Partially even, you know what I mean? If you also see this with Next, I guess. We don't route like by file path, but that's typically how I've always built my applications anyway, because that's usually domain driven. And I just think that domain driven architecture is usually really powerful.
Yep, totally agree. It's also easy to wrap your head around. And one of the things, I work with a lot of different clients at different projects. It's different if you have one project. If your job is developer on a team and you build one project, you have very different considerations. But for me, from hopping from project to project, I really value reusability and basically copy pastability of my code. So if I build a nice feature for one client that I sold to another client, of course, with their agreement, I really like the idea of being able to drop in just the majority of the folders without having to think about it. And I think domain-driven just makes most sense out of that, where instead, if you look at this classic approach, which was what I think for small-scale apps works well, here you go by file type. So a container will always be included by page. But as long as this thing grows, you cannot just pick up your components, put it in another app, because there's a lot of things that you won't use. So.
Right. I also like just general separation of concern. If a group of components are together in a similar folder, I like knowing that they are related or dependent on each other. So I think breaking just your app out into smaller chunks can, in general, help with that. Figure out what can you tweak, what can you rip out. It almost kind of is like a contract by structure.
Very cool. Yeah, I totally agree. But yeah, NX, both NX and Ionic flexible enough to just go with whatever structure one pleases. So that's good there. One of the things I'm interested about, so we talked about Ionic React, and this, I think, looks very similar on the Angular counterpart. Not sure if there's any interesting thing to look at there.
No, I mean, from the user perspective, you're going to get the exact same experience with both the CLI and the output. The only other thing I can think of is whether you wanted to try and dabble in some of the capacitor side of things or not.
Totally. So that was what I was leaning towards. So this is Ionic React. Ionic Angular is going to be very similar. I'm pretty sure that maybe end of next month, you'll find this inside NXPM. So it will generate either one of these. Stay tuned for that. And I'll do some more live content on it there. Yeah, Capacitor, let's go. Enlighten me. I've not used it, at least not that I know of.
Sure. So I'll start off with just a little bit of background on Capacitor as well. I know we kind of touched on it. So in this case, we'll probably go ahead and use the app that we already generated. But Capacitor is entirely independent from Ionic. So in general, whether you use my plugin or you use Capacitor's CLI on a single app workspace, Capacitor can basically take any app, whether it's just plain static assets or your generated build output from whatever app. It could be Vue, it could be React. Really doesn't matter. As long as we have those generated static assets, Capacitor, will know what to do with those and whatnot. But for this, we will be using our app that we already generated. So if we go back to the command line, probably want to kill this first.
Yeah,
I guess we don't necessarily need to, but so the first step is going to be, do you have Xcode set up on your computer?
And let me quickly make a commit like scaffold app, so we can in a commit see the difference. And yes, I do have Xcode set up.
Cool. So adding Android and iOS as a platform are two different steps. So you're not locked into having both if you only just wanted one. Since you've already got Xcode set up, that'll probably be the easiest.
Yeah.
So with my schematics, we can type nx generate. Let's go ahead and do the @nxtend. Or I'm sorry, we're doing a runner.
We're gonna run.
Yeah, so we're actually running one of the builders. I completely forgot. So this is where I do interface with the Capacitor CLI. So like we had talked about with Firebase, I'm actually doing a similar approach with this. So I let the Capacitor CLI and all the work they've done into that do the leg of the work, and I just work with it under the hood. So actually, we're going to type nx run, because that is how we execute our builders. We'll do mobile, because that's the name of our app.
Yep.
And we can say : add. And then I also give you a config out of the box, so you can do : again. And iOS.
Very cool. Okay. While this is running, maybe you can run us through where this lives in Workspace, Jason.
Yep. So we have our mobile app here at the top. You'll see our list of targets. We have build. So if we scroll down just a little bit.
Yeah, let me, here we are. Cap, ads.
Yeah, so here are some of the ones that I've added on specifically for Capacitor. So I don't give you extremely easy access like the add command. Oh, it looks like we might have had a failure. Oh, I'm sorry. You have to build your app first.
Let's do that real quick. Nx build mobile to build the app first, because it needs something in the dist, which I guess makes a lot of sense.
Right.
Yeah. Cool. So this is the add schematic that you just had, and then this last semicolon will address the configuration that we have here.
Right.
Yeah.
So it all is kind of based off that cap builder in the Nxtend Capacitor project. So if you just did nx run mobile cap, you could pass in a -- command property with whatever you want. So there are like quite a few different Capacitor commands out there. You don't have to worry about me coding all of them for you. It should just work.
So -- and then I assume -- help here should give us access to the help of Capacitor itself, Capacitor proper. Okay, yeah, and then it asks for which Capacitor command, and if it wants
second
to
option,
install.
Right. So due to some of the way that Capacitor works, we do have to have a couple things like Capacitor plugins, as well as the Capacitor CLI installed on the project level package JSON, which is a little different than what most of NX goes for, which is like only using a package JSON at the top level of the workspace.
Yeah.
So that is kind of a limitation. So I allow users to essentially, let's say you wanted to sync your project, which usually involves copying over newly added plugins, copying over the build assets. Maybe you want to say like, it's just a convenience thing. Like, all right, I added a new plugin in the package.json. I want to run the command and let it update dependencies at the same time.
Right.
And that's pretty much kind of configured for you in the several different ones that you have below the cap workspace target. So add, copy, sync. I think sync will have package install set to true, see?
Yeah.
Since that is often a common operation.
Updates. And then for somebody who's worked with Capacitor before, these are all very common terms or actions, I assume?
Yep, correct. So yeah, a few basic things. And now that we've got, maybe now that we've got the package built or the app built, maybe we want to go ahead and run our add command again.
This was just a build, so we do the run iOS again. Very good that somebody is keeping track of things, you in this case.
No problem.
So I can admire the work you've done. This all looks super, super nice, by the way. It's
thank you.
Yeah, very, very cool.
I appreciate it. And so, yeah, so here, like I said, I'm passing this all off to essentially the Capacitor CLI, but what it is doing is it is generating a full iOS application in a subfolder in your project directory. It is installing everything it needs to run your application in that web view. You have to do no configuration other than running this. And this first step, adding it, will essentially run the copy command, which copies over the build assets, and the update command, which will pull in any plugins you've defined before it gets going. So you're now completely set up and ready to go. The last line of the build output is misleading because you can't exactly do that. That's just part of the Capacitor build output.
Yeah, but I guess we have this one here, right?
Yes. So now we can say open:iOS.
Yeah.
So I've kind of tried to, with those predefined configurations, make it somewhat, easy to connect the brain if you're used to like standard Capacitor CLI commands.
Sure.
So
yeah.
Now we should have this opening in an Xcode workspace.
I'm gonna check it out. It of course starts in my other main window. So let me quickly drag this one over. That happens all day, every day. So awesome. This is the app. It's built here. I normally only go into Xcode to debug stuff, but
right.
This all seems very, very nice.
Yep, and I'm definitely not an Xcode expert. I haven't really touched iOS development since iOS development came out. So I can't speak to a whole lot more than that. But I do know if you hit the little play button at the top there, and you've got an emulator or something set, we're going to see our app fire up.
Let me not send it to my phone because that's not visible for you, but this one should be. So this, I think, is another common pattern for anybody working with any mobile apps that's not native. I never done native development after, after Android 3 came out or something. I've always stuck to the Ionic-ish solutions, but this is basically a clean iOS app.
Yep.
And it copies over our project in here, basically anything needed to run. And here we see our assets being copied over. So this is all the stuff, and somewhere in here is our app compiled away.
Yes. And what's really nice about this, since we talked about Cordova and PhoneGap before, I believe the kind of Cordova way of doing things is it would try and generate something like this on every build, which would cause issues. Whereas this is like a static thing that we generate once and it's there. And if you really want like more control over the app, you can literally just go into Xcode like you saw and tweak this however you like. You may not, that's probably not going to give you the web to native plugin type stuff, you know what I mean? But if you needed to do things under the hood, you can. You have complete freedom to do so.
Yeah, very cool. I think this is the place where if I look at myself, my own history, as I said, debugging. So for instance, with React Native, adding icons is quite a horrible experience. You really need to know how to do it. This is the place where you then go into build settings and tweak stuff, like get duplicate paths out or whatever it is, but also installing some native plugins. They need a little nudge to work. Often related to like things like file pass and something. So.
And to be clear, like for the most part, especially with the upcoming Capacitor 3 release, when you do add native plugins like a camera, like access to the file system, you usually don't have to touch anything under the Xcode stuff, or it's very little. It might be like a small line you have to add to a config, and that's about it. So they make it really easy, so you don't have to get into the native code if you don't want to.
Very
now,
cool. Yeah,
I do believe.
That's
there
nice.
We go.
Yeah, it's a bit.
I was going to say I was a little bit slower than I expected, but it might be because your computer's got a lot going on right now.
Yep, it does. And but I do have this beautiful emulator here, and which, since the last version, allows to be docked on the side. So then this should give quite a nice experience where we can see the native and the web counterparts working together. And this should start up anytime now. I'm going to close up this inspector. And I hope it will appear. I guess it will appear.
I have faith.
Yep, me too.
I've done this many times, so I hope it shows up.
It says running app on iPhone 12, which is the name of my simulator, and yeah, it basically should. So, okay, cool. So we scaffolded new app. We added it here. So this is kind of an interesting and honestly unexpected thing to have to do manually. I don't. It's definitely not something I'm mad about. I'm not at all mad. I'm out of words how to say it. I'm kind of surprised that we had to add this in manually, but it does make sense, specifically with the idea if like you only want to build Android, like why pay the tax of worrying about iOS if this is what you will. Like for instance, where I'm living, the market is like 95% Android, so it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to work with an iOS app from the start. So very cool.
A lot of it has to do with like file system size. You know what I mean? Like on the project, you're literally adding in a whole extra app. So if you don't need it, you know, don't bother with it.
Yeah. So this should also show, and this is okay. This is already very pretty. If I do a git status, so check what files changed. Few observations here. It's only in the apps mobile iOS folder plus the yarn log. Let's ignore that for a second. But everything lives here. The beauty of this is instead of having it on the top level of the project, I can add more mobile apps and they can have their own iOS app. So one app doesn't interfere with the other, which is something that really goes well with the philosophy of NX, I think.
Yeah, then, I totally agree.
Yeah, and then I imagine if we change iOS here, add Android, that will create an Android folder and run that for us. Yeah.
You've got it.
Awesome.
If you've got Android Studio and all that jazz.
Right. In the meanwhile, they uploaded. Very cool. So we needed just to give it a little time. As you mentioned, my computer is having a hard time.
Well, simulators are usually not fast for anyone, but
yeah, I think the new M1 might be some improvement here as it runs on the same architecture as it emulates.
That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, I think that's definitely not a surprise, but I think they're moving to ARM, and their emulator doesn't really need to emulate; it can just run. So,
right,
this is very, very cool, and it's definitely one of the fastest ways to add a mobile app to your Nx Workspace. I think also one of the more flexible ways, at least that you have Android and iOS as an option. I'm pretty familiar with React Native and their integration. I've done one app with them. It came out maybe 2 months ago. So that's definitely another thing. I really hope to see NativeScript in this same space as well. So NativeScript has a way to do NX with XPlat, but it does let you buy into more XPlat structure. So if that's not the only thing you want to do, that's kind of a downside of that approach. So I really hope to see NativeScript appear in a similar fashion. But yeah, all in all, I'm super impressed with what I see. All looks very nice and polished. And this, yeah, I was looking where can I find my logging?
So
it's going to be here.
I've actually learned a trick too. I don't think console logs are going to show up here, but if you're using like an iPhone, for instance, and you're running on your mobile device, you can actually use Safari to attach to the debugger on your phone. And so you can debug JavaScript like that through Safari. It's been a minute since I've actually had to do that, but that's where a couple of quirks come in, where you're kind of like strangely falling back on web tools to develop or to debug your native app. But
right. But I do think I'm just standing it up here, starting up Safari to see if I can actually show this. But I do think that's an interesting point where, no, I don't see it right now. I must not have enabled the tools. Anyway, let's not bother. But yeah, I think the best experience for most of the stuff is just going here and using your dev tools and to play around with your CSS here if you want to style stuff, for instance. And then if you have something that is on the mobile site that really only appears maybe in your emulator or real devices, then the way to go is connect your Safari to this web view that's actually rendering out the thing. Because if you look at it from a very crude way, this is just a full screen browser that we present where we render out this app. Yeah. Yep,
exactly. So, and that's usually how I do it. I usually spot check on mobile, you know what I mean? I do most of my development, go to make sure it hasn't broken, usually doesn't. I don't have any weird quirks usually on the mobile side of things. So, you know, that again is just one of these really nice benefits of Ionic. You get to develop in this really polished, you know, ecosystem of developer tools with different plugins. You know, if you're using something like Redux, which has another set of developer tools, you know, you get to leverage all that existing technology.
Yeah, this is awesome. So one of the things I always use in most of my apps is GraphQL, and one of the nice things that this has to offer me is that I can reuse everything I do for React GraphQL. So I can just use my hooks-based approach and it will just work. I don't even need to ask it because I know it works if it works in React. And this is another very, very compelling thing about Ionic. Awesome. Yeah.
One more thing I wanted to point out.
Sure.
You know, again, not trying to say bad or worse, but some other, like, let's take React Native for example. I think a lot of times the idea is like, oh, I could build that in React and I can share a lot of code between the two projects. In this case, I think you get even more of that, because not only are you just able to share some business logic, but you can literally take these Ionic components. You could have a more catered to desktop web experience, right? And you could share a lot more of these components between your mobile experience, right? Maybe you have a different settings page because it just doesn't look good on desktop, right? But then a lot of your main UI could be shared between them in a shared React library like we were talking about earlier. So I think the flexibility there, it just, you know, it keeps going.
Yeah, totally agree. And I totally resonates with me. So currently when I do reuse in React and React Native, this is mostly on the level of, okay, I have a bunch of hooks that work because Apollo client works for both. So that's kind of the merit of Apollo team more than my own stuff. Then other things that work both well in both are things like your providers. Let's say you have an authentication provider that generally translates very well. But then if you go into the nitty gritty and into rendering out your components, then you're basically on two separate paths. And I really haven't found a nice way to...
I've heard of React Native Web, which is a really weird concept. I have not had any experience with that, but I just want to give, I guess, credit where credit is due. There is also efforts to trying to solve that, but, you know, just a different approach.
Yeah. I think React Native Web is what they use on their homepage. So if you go to React Native, go to the website, you can actually render stuff out there without having to start the emulators. So I looked at it. I didn't really like the output. I know I'm from the time where you would open DevTools and look at the output and learn. That's the way how I learned how these things all work together. Not even DevTools, just open view source, paste it in, etc. React Native for web, what I've seen is mangles it all up. So it's just a compilation target, which makes a lot of sense from a technical point of view. From a usage point of view, I'm not sure if I'm really a fan about how that works, but to each their own, I guess. And
Yeah, I mean, I
Awesome.
think that if I was in the React Native ecosystem long before Ionic, because like I said, most of my reason for being on Ionic is because I found it. I had a really good friend of mine tell me about it. I looked into it, fell in love, and just haven't had a reason to leave. So if you're already in the
Yeah.
React Native ecosystem, React Native Web could very well be the solution that you're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess in general, the answer always is it depends. And yeah.
Exactly.
Awesome. I'm super happy with what I saw. I've been meaning to dive into Nxtend and its tools for a long time, but life gets in the way. So I'm super happy that you came on and showed me around. It's definitely motivating, and I'm pretty sure I'm gonna try to convince at least one of my clients, like, hey, we should look into Ionic React, because it's more React than React Native, I would say. It's kind of a bold statement here, but hey, it's Monday. We can do these kind of things.
Hot takes on Monday. I'm here for it.
Yep. Awesome. So with that in mind, do you have any hot takes or anything you like to plug? Any things? Maybe before that, let's get to the plugging part. Is there anything you'd like to see added to Nxtend? Is there anything you have in mind, like this is going to be the next thing that I'm working on?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is already kind of in progress. We actually had like a hackathon day at Ionic, but
Awesome.
I had a coworker help me kind of get started on the Ionic View plugin. So that's really kind of like top of my priority list.
Nice.
So we're actually going to be leveraging one of the other NX plugin authors who make the View plugin. So I've been chatting with them a little bit, and they're looking at kind of making more proper NX 11 support over, the near future. So I'd like to kind of polish that up and get something out there just to have the complete trifecta of the frameworks. So,
yeah.
But there's always a to-do list. Go check my GitHub issues.
Okay, that's definitely a good one. So the GitHub is github/nxtend/-team. They're also, why is this not in the history? This is not my default browser. So nxtend-team/nxtend. This is the organization with the repos. There is a bunch of issues here. So if you want to pick up stuff, I would definitely go ahead. And this already kind of tells us that you're at least interested in Vue here. So.
Yep, and I usually, you can also go up, I don't really talk about this too much, I don't advertise this, but if you go up to the projects tab at the top of GitHub, you will see all of my stuff broken out pretty elegantly. And if you opened up, let's say, do the Ionic React one, because I know I've got some new and old stuff in there. But you can see what I'm like working on, what's up to do, what I've got like more in the backlog. So yeah, I mean, if anyone wants to pick up stuff or want to look into some of the stuff I'm going to be working on, feel free to do that and reach out. Awesome. Or if you just want to keep track on what's coming down the pipeline next, it's probably a good place.
Awesome. Yeah. So check out this project. Also follow Devin on Twitter. He definitely needs to go towards like 1,000 followers and more. always quality content here. So very cool. You're really developing this in the open. I'm always kind of hesitant to put projects out there because people might think you're really committing to stuff, which might be the downside of doing this. But I'm super impressed how this all looks. Yeah, definitely great work. Awesome job, Devin. It's yeah.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and thank you for letting me come on here. I think we kind of came across each other through the NX plugin stuff, back when that kind of kicked off, and I've been a big fan ever since. So thanks for having me on. And yeah,
awesome.
If anyone wants to check out my newer landing page, I also have devinshoemaker.com. So that's kind of my new spot.
Right. And I think, let me, and now I can spell it right. So there we are. Awesome. So this is new homepage. Tailwind?
Yep. Yes.
Tailwind. Nice.
Next to Tailwind. I had a weekend project where I was like, I want to learn these. And by the end of it, I was like, all right, I think I've got the motivation. Let's just make the freaking blog.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. We're moving away from having everything hosted on Medium and Dev2 and whatever not to self-hosting our blogs again. And we're going to even peek into the future, I see here. This is.
Oh, did I mess up that date? I think I messed up the date. Hilarious,
Yeah.
but yeah, I just
Okay.
need to go fix that in my markdown.
Awesome. So cool. Yeah, and then last question here. Is there anything else you like to plug besides your website that everybody would check out? And your Twitter?
No,
Any?
I mean, that's what I do these days. So that's pretty much it. Feel free to, reach out to me if anyone has any questions or just wants to chat about tech. I love all this stuff. I love web and open source, like we've talked about. So, that's pretty much it.
Awesome. Devin's also pretty active on the Nx community Slack. So this is also a place where you can reach out to him in case of any question or issues. And with that, I think we can wrap it up for today. This was super interesting episode about how to add mobile capabilities to Nx Workspace. For those of you watching, if there's anything or anyone you like to see on my show, please tell me, let me know, and I can try to make this happen. These things happened pretty spontaneous. Yesterday I invited Devin, and today we're on, so this can be handled super quickly. Same goes with Mike. These Ionic folks are just super flexible, so I really like and appreciate that. And with that, I'm going to leave it for today. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful Monday. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.